Hello, I'm Gemma and this is Non-Fic Books, and today I thought I'd do a tag video, and this is Jen Campbell's brand new tag, the Time or Place book tag. And obviously I wasn't tagged, but I really fancied doing it as I thought it was a lovely thing to do. So I will link her original video down below. And the first book that really has a strong memory of Time or Place I don't actually have with me, but it's any of Enid Blyton's Secret 7 books. They're really some of the first books I remember reading, and I can just picture myself probably about 7 or 8 years old, curled up in my room, just not moving for most of the summer holidays unless I was kicked out into the garden when I would continue reading them. I just absolutely adored all of them when I was young, and they really probably are one of the set of books that sparked my love of reading. And then as I got a little bit older, there wasn't, when I was that age, the same sort of young adult or new adult fiction. So once you'd finished with children's books, you tended to move on to either romance or sci-fi and fantasy, or starting off with some of the easier bits of adult literature. And I got really into fantasy when I was about 11 or 12. And this Juliet Marillier's Daughter of the Forest, the first in what was then the Sevenwaters trilogy, but now has 4 or 5 books. And this was absolutely brilliant. I was not the happiest of children around that sort of age. I found secondary school, the transition, quite difficult. And it was such a beautiful escapism sort of read for me. And it really helped me through a bad period and really fostered that love of reading that got totally cemented by the time I was about 13 or 14, which was when I then picked up Sense and Sensibility. We'd had to read Pride and Prejudice, and I'd liked it, but I definitely had that school time pressure. And having loved the BBC drama from pretty much age dot, because my mum, well, obviously not, it was only done in the 90s, but my mum always used to have it on, and it was my brother's favourite thing, which is strange for an 8-year-old boy, but we saw it so much. But Sense and Sensibility was first probably classic that I chose to read off my own back without any sort of pressure or school requirement, and it's still one of my favourite Austens. My favourite is probably Northanger Abbey, but I just love Eleanor in this book. And I remember being 14 years old, and again it was in the summer, just being absolutely absorbed and not really caring what else was going on, but that I could just read this book. And that really sparked the love, and I think over the summer I then read all of the other Austens, which I still love. And Tess of the D'Urbervilles was then probably the next classic that I really fell in love with. And this was actually a school read. It was one of the books I studied for my GCSE. And I really loved this book. And it's one of those few that I didn't like it the first time I read it, but as we studied it and I really started to understand some of the symbols and the themes throughout it, that I just fell in love with it. Unfortunately, I've got probably the ugliest cover that there is for Tess, and because that is really foul. But I'll have to get myself a nice copy at some point, because this book means a lot to me. Because it was, the GCSEs was probably around the time school was starting to get better for me. I really enjoyed this, which helped, because if you love what you're studying, it makes school just a lot more enjoyable. And that's a really special book to me. And then another classic, Evelyn Waugh's Brideshead Revisited. This is my first term at university. I very quickly had a very close friendship with a couple of chaps, and we spent quite a lot of time drinking red wine and watching the ITV, I want to say, but it might be BBC television adaptation with Anthony Andrews and Jeremy Irons, which is just beautiful, which made me fall in love with it and check out this book. And it's probably, if I had to choose, my favourite book, and it's such a strong memory both of reading it through that time and then watching that with 2 very close friends. And then the next one is totally different, and it's Sarah Wise's The Italian Boy, which is about murder and grave robbing. And it's brilliant. This came with me on a walking holiday with my mum when I was around 20, and it's a really, really well written, interesting look into the time where grave robbing was starting to become quite a serious problem in London because there were so few bodies for medical students to study. And this is a true case of a young boy that was murdered rather than grave robbed, which unfortunately few people did go into that. And sticking with the slightly morbid theme, The Victorian Celebration of Death by James Stephens Curl. I studied archaeology when I was at uni, and I, unlike a lot of people, study more modern archaeology, so the 18th century and 19th century, through up till probably around the end of Victoria's reign. And the Victorians' attitude towards death was fascinating, and is actually amazing ground for an archaeologist because there was so many different parts of their material culture. And this is a fantastic book. It's really well written, it's got loads of really interesting, I'm trying to find some saying that, interesting sort of illustrations and breakdown of the way the Victorians did actually celebrate, and actually celebrate is quite an accurate word, death, really celebrated the person's life and really marked them out. And this was probably one of the books that I read the most during my third year at university, especially throughout the winter because I was studying grave memorials during that time, and it was really entertaining and fascinating, and I certainly read more of it than I needed to for my course, and I have since reread it because it is actually that interesting. And then after university I ended up, probably my first serious job after that was an okay job, but it was in an office and I had an hour's lunch break every day, and I used to go and sit upstairs in the office building, which gave you slight views out onto some fields, and I really remember sitting there and reading Melvin Bragg's The Adventure of English, and this is all about the history of the English language, and it's an absolutely fascinating read. It's quite a good thick one, but I love Melvin Bragg's writing style. I find it very easy to read but not dumbed down, and I just think the English language is a fascinating topic, and I can strongly remember sitting there and talking to a gentleman from another office about this book, sadly the weekend before he died, but it's such a strong image in my brain about sitting there and chatting to him about this, and it's got a really heart-wrenching but warming memory associated with it. So I'd also just recommend this book anyway, it's fascinating. And then on a lighter note, this is a book that really reminds me of my husband, because MC Beaton's Hamish Macbeth series, we actually have over the last 4 or 5 years been on and off reading these to each other, so it just makes me think of him very much, and they're lovely. I read some of them just for fun as well, but they're absolutely gorgeous little cosy mysteries. You're never going to be surprised. Hamish Macbeth is always going to solve the murder, but they're just priceless. I love them. And then the final book is a book that I read on my honeymoon, and that was Among the Janeites by Deborah Yaffe. And this is a really fun look through the sort of Janeite culture and the mad obsessive fans that Jane Austen does tend to develop. And it's not the best book ever written. She's a journalist, and it's got a very sort of journalistic bent rather than a more full, longer work. And a lot of the people she looks at tend to be just people she seems to have found interesting, rather than any sort of big link between them, apart from the fact that they're mad about Jane Austen. But I'd really recommend it if you are a mad Janeite or you are really into Jane Austen, because it's very entertaining. So those are my 10 books which have a strong time and place connotation to me. If you have any questions, do leave them down below, and thank you very much for Jen for creating this tab. I'll see you in a video soon. Bye!